Welcome to Cognitive Pleasure. The story you've been told about World War II is probably wrong. It wasn't caused by a single evil man or one failed treaty. The truth is far more unsettling. The war was the result of the entire global system breaking down all at once.
See, this wasn't an accident. It was a structural collapse. Several deep, powerful systems, economic, political, and international, all failed at the same time, pushing the world toward a conflict that seemed, in the end, logical. To understand this, we have to look at the first layer of the problem.
And that first layer isn't ideology, it's economics. After World War I, Europe was trapped in a financial architecture that was fundamentally impossible. It was the time bomb, just sitting there, waiting for a spark.
Here's how the trap worked. Germany was ordered to pay crippling war reparations. To get that cash, it had to export a massive amount of goods. But other countries were protecting their own broken economies, so they blocked German exports with huge tariffs. Germany was cornered. With no other way to pay its bills, it did the only thing it could. It started printing money.
And this is where the system collapses for ordinary people. Hyperinflation didn't just happen, it exploded. The German mark became completely worthless. At this moment, people panic. Your life savings, your pension, everything your family had built for generations, it vanished overnight. This didn't just create poverty, it created a deep, burning anger and radicalized an entire generation.
Now, Germany's crisis didn't happen in a vacuum. It was amplified by a much larger, fragile global system. There was a silent accelerator at play, tying the world's economies together in a rigid, brittle chain, the gold standard.
Think of the gold standard as a set of economic handcuffs. It meant a country's currency was directly tied to gold, which prevented governments from injecting money into their economies to fight a downturn. So when the Great Depression hit, this rigid system forced them to cut spending, which only made the crisis worse. It essentially paralyzed the world's democracies right when they needed to act.
And this had a devastating political consequence. While democracies like the US and the UK looked slow, ineffective, and trapped in endless debate, authoritarian states like Germany and Japan acted with swift, decisive force. The economic collapse wasn't just about unemployment anymore. It fundamentally destroyed people's faith in democracy itself.
And this is where you have to connect the abstract idea of economic failure to actual human psychology. When you're in total chaos, when your money is worthless and your government seems helpless, extremism stops sounding extreme. It starts to sound rational.
You see, fascism and Nazism didn't rise because millions of people suddenly became evil. They rose because they made a simple, powerful offer to people whose lives had been destroyed. We'll give you jobs. We'll give you order. We'll restore your national pride. They promised control in a world that felt completely out of control. This is one of the most crucial things to understand. In the face of absolute chaos, when all the old institutions have failed, many people will choose the promise of certainty over the ideal of freedom. The system had broken down, and extremism presented itself as the solution.
This internal pressure didn't stay internal. Once these economies were militarized and their populations were mobilized, the pressure had to go somewhere. It turned outward. And for some nations, war became an economically logical strategy. Not just about ideology, it was about survival.
Notice this critical pressure point. Industrial powers like Germany and Japan were fundamentally resource poor. Germany needed oil, rubber, and grain. Japan was almost entirely dependent on imported resources to function. This wasn't a minor problem. It was an existential threat.
And this is where the system snaps. To these states, peace meant being slowly starved by economic blockades and tariffs from their rivals. War, however, offered a path to seize the resources they needed to survive. Policies like Germany's Lebensraum, their living space, weren't just about ideology. They were framed as a cold, rational necessity. Peace meant decline. War meant survival.
So we have economic collapse, pushing nations toward conflict. And we have political extremism, making that conflict seem desirable. The final failure was the collapse of the one international system designed to prevent exactly this. The last safety net was about to break.
The League of Nations could condemn these actions, but it couldn't do anything about them. It had no army, no real enforcement power, and the United States wasn't even a member. With every unpunished act of aggression, the message got clearer and clearer. International rules were a joke. It was a green light for anyone with an army.
This leads us to appeasement, which is so often seen as simple weakness or cowardice. But was it really that simple? No. It was a policy born directly from the deep psychological trauma of the First World War.
You have to remember, leaders in Britain and France were running countries that were demographically and financially shattered. They were desperately trying to avoid another slaughter that would wipe out a second generation of young men. Appeasement failed not because they were fools, but because by that point, the system had no other mechanisms for peace left to offer. It was the only tool they had left.
And that is the final unsettling conclusion. World War II became inevitable once all the peaceful systems had failed. The economic system, the political system, and the international diplomatic system had all broken down, aligning perfectly to make violent conflict the most logical path forward. It wasn't madness, it was a system-level breakdown.
Subscribe for more.
This is Cognitive Pleasure.